I want to talk about the true extent of the damage that's done by maintaining a status quo of political correctness, specifically within the gaming world, the comic book world, within the general undertaking of creative endeavor. But a little backstory. I've been playing BioWare games for a long time. I'm older than a lot of you. I've been in the nitty-gritty with BioWare for almost 20 years. Anyway, BioWare forums, long story short, I decided to make a post, which admittedly was a bit of a baiting and trolly post, voicing a observation that the romance options, the heterosexual male romance options available to male protagonists in Dragon Age Inquisition, and I'm not interested or disinterested in romance. It's something I might do for the sake of the story, but it's neither here nor there. It's interesting because there are only two options. That's one, whereas others get many more. But more importantly, they're objectively unattractive. One of the major romance interests, probably the primary one, has short hair, is middle-aged, masculine, chiseled features. I made the statement in the thread that most heterosexual men wouldn't find that attractive. Of course, then ensued the slew of comments. One, that's just your opinion. Two, I find her attractive. Three, the romance characters aren't made for you to be attracted to them, and so on and so forth. And once again, this was a baiting thread to some extent. I knew what would happen, more or less. Longer story, shorter version, the thread got shut down. These threads always get shut down. Threads with dissenting opinions or views. In that thread, I cited evidence, that is evolutionary evidence, to suggest why, for example, a long-haired, younger female would be more attractive to the heterosexual male player base. I don't really care that there are only two options or whatever. And people came out railing against Evo Psych and evolutionary biology and so on and so forth. Even one transgendered person, apparently, since his or her signature was filled with transgender references. Now, it's interesting, the rejectors of science, there's a lot of science that suggests that transgenderism, or this feeling of being in the wrong body, is supported by neurological evidence. So there's evidence, scientific evidence for that, but they like to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it got shut down. Meanwhile, there are tons of threads in BioWare forums suggesting that there be more female characters in this, that, and BioWare forums is a PC war ground. It is the depths of degeneration and depravity supreme. It's I'm just not going to post there anymore, even though I did post that one thing for the purposes of baiting. I want to talk about what we lose to political correctness and why we should combat it in the following order. Why should we combat political correctness? It's not to win over the hearts and minds of the politically correct. Most people, as I've said many times, don't change their mind. Most people are not amenable to evidence that contradicts their ego affirmation ideas or ideologies. It's to really make people on the fence aware, sitting on the fence, aware of just how great the stakes are, how high the stakes are. I mean, for one thing, political correctness is censorship. I don't believe in censorship. I'm not, for example, in the country where I live, still Germany, it is illegal to deny the Holocaust. I think that's incorrect. I don't think it should be illegal. I think you should be able to say whatever you want. I mean, nobody's preventing anyone from saying that Obama is actually an alien from outer space and the White House has been infiltrated by aliens, but people don't take them very seriously. Just like a Holocaust denier, whatever evidence he might have, there's a mountain of evidence against it. But people should be free to say what they want to say. That's the first issue when it comes to issues of political correctness. It's censorship. Now, I admit, BioWare forums, it's private. They can do whatever they want. But the problem of political correctness is more than just censorship. The real depravity of political correctness, the real tyranny, is just how far it goes. I'm specifically talking about the gaming world and the comic world and fantasy in general. What is human fantasy but the wellspring and the beginnings and the end of creative energy and endeavor, specifically man-made creative energy and endeavor? Look at all the sci-fi things that have inspired, quite possibly, inventions later on. Look at the worlds that have been spun and woven by people like Ed Greenwood, The Forgotten Realms, Dungeons and Dragons, authors such as R.R. Martin, Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, the late Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and the Mass Effect universe, whatever its flaws. All these things are primarily male creations. I think fantasy, more than anything else, is a male phenomenon. It's not that women don't fantasize, it's just rarely the case that they produce these kinds of epic works or these kinds of worlds that are just populated with so much detail. So what do the PC police come along and what do they say? They say, well, your fantasy is limited. Your fantasy can only create this much, or can only create that kind of thing, or that kind of character, or that kind of political setting. They come along and say, that's the only thing you're allowed to do. See, that's the true tyranny of political correctness. Those are the depths of depravity. It's literally taking the fantastical, fantasy, science fiction, worlds without limits, worlds where anything potentially can go if it's well put together, and saying, no, there's the limit. You can't go further. What is political correctness? It's thought control. It's telling us, gamers, creators, people who enjoy fantastical endeavor, you can't think that. You're not allowed to. Now, if this had been in place for the past, say, 100 years, we would have lost a lot. We would have lost a lot in the way of productive, fantastical creation, be it science fiction or high fantasy or something in between, whatever. We would have lost a lot. Dungeons and Dragons out the window. And quite frankly, it's very interesting that the only reason why things like Dungeons and Dragons was able to get off the ground is because it wasn't profitable back then. It was a pure male creation. Every now and then you'd have female participants, but men created and wrote basically everything. They created the ideas. I'm just giving one example since I used to play Dungeons and Dragons a lot. It wasn't really popular until maybe the 90s. I mean, 80s it was still viewed with suspicion. And a lot of the offshoots that stem from that, the different RPGs and so on, same thing. And later on they get turned into video games. I mean, there's a sort of a chain of succession here. These things back in the day, in the 70s and the 60s, they would have never gotten off the ground had they been profitable immediately. Why? Because the PC police, in particular women, would have infiltrated it. Bar Russ has talked about this before with regards to comic cons. It's the same thing. I grew up collecting comics. At some point I stopped. I think it was 18, although I still follow basic comic storylines to some extent. And I would go to the local comic book shop in the Bronx where I grew up, and there were no women there. Not a single one. They weren't spending their allowances on buying comics or whatever. It didn't exist. The same is very true of video games. I mean, back in the day when video games were extremely limited, say in the early 90s, no one was interested. Even in the late 90s, not many people were interested in terms of the female population. I mean, this is an observable, easily predictable pattern. Something becomes popular, profitable, women want to sink their claws into it. It's always that way. Now with BioWare to an extent has been hijacked. It's not that I don't have any problem with BioWare creating their own vision of things. Whatever that means. But they are the PC company extraordinaire. They are the company that just kowtows and actually agrees, I think, in large measure with the political correctness doctrine. I'm thinking specifically of Gator, Mike Gator, who happens to be gay. But he himself has stated that despite the fact that he's gay, he's still a white male, and so he has to check his privilege. My question to that, or my response is, what does that have to do with creating a fantasy world? A fantasy world is a world where anything goes. It's the last bastion of human thought. It's a opportunity to delve into something that is not, but potentially could be, or maybe never will be, and to just escape into just an amazing, intricate other dimension. And who are these people that then come in and say, no, 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 you're not allowed to think that? If these people, the PC people, and to a large extent many of them are women, as well as their yay-saying white knights, want to make their own fantasy games, they should. We all know what happened with that, with, what was it, Depression? I didn't even pay attention. That particular female developer who made that not-so-great game. Make your own games. Start a Kickstarter project. Get support, get funding, compete. If you have a great vision, make that vision come true. I mean, Anita Sarkeesian, that's what she did, right? She ended up getting a lot of money. Maybe you'll get a lot of money for that. But this kind of thought control, telling people what they can think or not think, I hate using the term Orwellian, it's very dangerous. Because as I said, fantasy is the last bastion of free thought in many ways. It's the last place where you're almost free to offend, but along come the PC police and the social justice warriors and no, 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 no. We can't offend people even in a fantasy setting. We can't even have the fantasy just run wild with whatever the dictates of that particular dimensional world might be. No, 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 no. We have to control that too. And this is a perfect example of what's happened to BioWare. I've never argued with these people, at least in recent years, on the BioWare forums or elsewhere, because I thought I could convince them. These people are living in their own little fantasy worlds detached from reality. They have no interest in science, at least to the extent that it affects their gaming experience or their human interactions. But to show others out there that this needs to be stood up to. I mean, we can't just allow this to happen, because when the thought control police come in to the final bastion, the last refuge of free thought, which is the fantastical, the world that developers create, the books that they write, the comics that they write and illustrate, all will be lost. I mean, academia is already a lost cause. You can't, even if you produce evidence, you can't say things that offend people. People get fired for that. Politics is a lost cause. Normal social settings, a lost cause. The workplace, a lost cause. What's left? What domain is left in human inquiry but the domain of inquiry of the fantastical, of exploring those things that may be or may never be, creating entirely new worlds to delve into, to dive into? That's all that's left, really. And it is teetering, unfortunately, on the brink of destruction. The things that we grew up cherishing, the things that we put in energy in. I used to be a dungeon master, among other things. I created campaigns. I was a creator. What do these people do? These social justice warriors, many of them women, they come in and they shit on it. They destroy it. They tell you what you can think, what you can do. Now, the reason why they're able to get away with this is because, quite frankly, everyone goes along with it. And I think it's a matter of time, quite literally a matter of time before these guys, these sorts of people come in, the yay-sane white knights as well as the feminists and the females that they serve, and start initiating an influence on games outside the fantasy or sci-fi genre, shooters. Most people, look, I'm hardly a good defender of Call of Duty or Call of Duty. I hate that game. But they're going to come and say, we don't want these kinds of games anymore. I mean, there's already a ton of faked false evidence suggesting that video games promote violence. Bullshit. Just as pornography supposedly objectifies women and promotes violence against women, when there are a number of data showing that actually reduces sexual violence in various places, such as California. I mean, they're going to come in and they're not going to give an inch. The problem is, if you give them an inch, they're gonna want a foot. All right? And I'm very adamant about this. The fantasy realm, you as a gamer, you as a creator, you as a participant in fantasy, whatever your role might be, they're telling you what you can think and what you can't think. And they're telling you what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. They're telling you you can't have that kind of female because that's not representative of a strong blah 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 independent female of some weird feministic vision that was created out of thin air by BioWare, among others, whatever it might be. In the case of these romances, I mean, I don't have anything against per se the things that some of the politically correct people talk about. You want to put in gay romances? I don't care. I'm not really affected by gay romances. You want to put in bisexual? I might do a lesbian romance. That's cool. It's just this dogged adherence to suppressing truth and suppressing creative energy, ultimately. Where people are just so fearful, they're just dancing around on one foot, tripping over each other's shoelaces. They don't even know what to do anymore. Everyone is so terrified of the PC police. So if for no other reason, this kind of crap needs to be combated because it is the last bastion of creative fantasy. Now, some areas, I was talking about this with a friend, might be safe. I mean, Minecraft seems almost universally a male gaming endeavor because it's very technical and mathematical. But maybe they'll try to take that over too. Maybe they'll try to get rid of it. I mean, they're already assailing shooters. I don't know what they would say about Minecraft. But the creative, and here's the thing about the creative process. I think creators are allowing fans in a way too much to manipulate them. I mean, yes, you need to make a profit. You need to be able to cater and market. Sure. But look at George R.R. Martin, who everyone knows by now, but I was reading the books way back in the day before anyone knew who he was. This was a guy who did a lot of unpopular things in his novels. He depicted scenes, killed off characters that were rather beloved or people were fond of or popular. But that was his artistic vision, and he went with it. And despite some objections, he ultimately became very popular, and people like his work and material. This is something I think that game developers, as they walk on the teetering balance between marketing and fan service and trying to make profits and their own artistic vision, and Mass Effect 3 ending is not an example of this, before anyone says that. This is what they need to go back to. They need to go back to the roots. I mean, they need to have a ruthless but powerful artistic vision, follow through with it, and people need to either like it or not, instead of just catering to this shit. Because in the case of BioWare, the Gator thing, I'll call it the Gator, he's been there for a while, and he's always had the politically correct bullshit going. But this became more and more an issue as time went on because of BioWare's willingness to compromise their own message for the sake of people bitching and complaining. Do I think there are times when bitching and complaining are legitimate? Yeah, I mean, look at the train wreck of Mass Effect 3, but that's really an exceptional case. Sure, you want to make improvements. I mean, Dragon Age 2, an abomination. But that artistic vision, whatever the genre, specific genre, I think that needs to remain intact. Because fantasy, I really believe, is the final frontier of humanity. It's where all those creative energies need to freely flow and be poured into whatever world is being created. You can't do that if people are saying, you're not allowed to say this, you can't do this. So those are what the stakes are, actually. The stakes are that high. This is thought control. These are the thought police, the politically correct. And I think it's if we give them an inch, they're going to take a foot. And if things progress and continue, it's going to get worse and worse. And in my opinion, the popularity of video games as well as comic books is actually a negative in a lot of ways, because we've lost a lot of the core creative elements. People come in, particularly women, and they have no interest in creative endeavor. I mean, have you seen the number of Twitch streams with pretty faces and cleavage popping up, asking for donations? It's a bit uncanny. But those are what the stakes are. Our right to think, our right to fantasize, our right to think up the things we want to think up and create. Creation, that's the price we're paying. Because of these petty, ignorant, stupid people. Let them make their own worlds. No, they can't do it. That's why they interfere and stomp on other people's visions and creations. Anyway, gentlemen, and the few women who listen, those are what the stakes are. This is why the politically correct police and their bullshit need to be combated. This is how high the stakes are. This is thought control. These people are telling you what to think and what you're allowed to think, and what can or can't be in a fantasy world. In a fantasy world. Reality, unfortunately, has already largely been conquered by these people. Are you going to let them conquer Skyrim, for example? Or Thetis? Or the galaxy of Mass Effect? I hope not. Take care.